All right. So this is our next chapter in Seven Deadly Sins. I believe this is what, the fifth one? Yeah, the fifth of the Seven Deadly Sins, but the sixth lesson, because we initially started off talking about what sin is. So pride is our word for tonight, and the opposite of pride is humility, and our mascot for pride is a horse. So remember when we talked about envy, that it was kind of a creepy sin? It kind of sneaks in and is not very nice. Well, pride is a frightening sin. Can you think of some scriptures in the Bible that talk about what God thinks about pride? Right off the top.
Doesn't he say he despises the proud or something like that in one part?
Okay. He opposes them.
Opposes, there you go. I knew it was
Opposes.
opposes.
Oh, how do you like an omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent God opposing you? Um, if you're prideful, that's what you get. What else? What else does God say?
Pride cometh before the fall.
Pride cometh before the fall. And the second phrase of that verse is a haughty spirit before destruction. Haughty spirit is pretty similar to pride. So fall, destruction. And those don't sound very good either, do they? So in some essences, if there's any sin that should frighten people to face God about, it maybe is pride, because of the things he says about it. All right, so we've used the word pride and we've talked a little bit about what God thinks about it, but what is pride? If you had to define it, what would you say it was?
Being full of oneself.
Full of oneself, okay? Other definitions?
I guess thinking they know better, or all of it.
Okay, so something along the lines of being the know-it-all.
Yeah.
Okay. 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 What else? Definitions of pride.
What about narcissism?
Did you say narcissist?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. What is pride in essence? It's an emotion, right? Pride is an emotion, but the emotion is directed inward. So it's self-directed. Is there a good form of pride? Or is all pride bad?
That sounds like a trick question.
What do you think?
I was just thinking that. It sounds like a trick question.
What do you think?
So with every emotion, right? There are positive or character traits. There are positive parts within that character trait. So knowing that, I would have to say that there would be a positive part of it, maybe just the fact that somebody has some confidence, but that could also be negative too, because it could be false confidence and then not relying on God. So I think it's a trick question.
You are right on topic. Remember when we talked about some of the earlier ones? Anger, for example, there is a righteous form of anger. And yes, pride has a good side to it. We are supposed to have a good sense, a proper sense of our own dignity and value, a self-respect. Because if we don't respect ourselves, how can we respect others? And if we don't respect ourselves, then we're calling God a liar, because he says we are dearly loved, precious children, and that we are of great worth. And if we say no, we're not, and we are valueless and all of that, yeah, we're disrespecting God. So yes, there is a good sense of pride. Pride being just a proper sense of dignity, value, and self-respect. Again, that's an emotion, and again, it has an inward direction, but it's not the bad form of pride. So the bad form of pride, an overuse of that respect in some essence of it. So a pleasure or satisfaction taking over the top in some achievement or possession or association that we have. You know, there's good sides of that too. Like, parents should be proud of their kids, right?
Right.
But something that goes above and beyond starts moving into the arrogant and disdainful haughtiness, treating others as if they're below you, less than you, that you are somehow better or bigger or above. So it's an excessively high opinion of yourself, conceit, if you will. Those are all sort of Webster's dictionary kind of definitions for pride. And there's a saying, the bigger a man's head gets, in other words, the more filled with pride, the easier it is to fill his shoes. What do you think about that?
That makes sense.
Because pride is overdoing the sense of self. So undue confidence in or attention to one's own skills, accomplishments, state, possessions, or position. That is a full definition of pride. So more confidence than you should have, more attention than you deserve or should pay to yourself, your own skills, your own accomplishments, your own state, your own possessions, or your own position. Again, it's emotion directed inward. So what are some words that you might use with somebody that's being prideful?
Arrogant, boastful,
Arrogant. There you go. Arrogant, boastful,
self-centered.
Braggadocious.
braggadocious. Yeah. What else? What about snobbish? You know, sticking their nose in the air.
Yeah.
Patronizing, condescending,
Huh.
rude, impatient, demanding, insensitive, pompous, egotistic, vain. Yeah, there's a lot of words in our language that have something to do with pride, aren't there?
Yes.
And some of those are used for synonyms of pride as well.
Mm-hmm.
So we said pride's the opposite of humility. So what is humility if we're trying for the right side of things and not the wrong side?
Giving credit where it's due. Like, I might be gifted in something to do something or whatever, but recognizing that that gift isn't because of me. It's a gift that God has given me.
Okay, good. And that is a big piece of humility, isn't it? It's a proper attitude about ourselves in relation to God, right? God's got to be a piece of it. So if humility is proper attitude in relation to God, pride must be somehow rebellion against God, right? Because if you're being prideful, you are taking the honor and glory that belongs to God and attributing them to yourself.
Yeah.
Does that sound dangerous?
Yeah.
Just a little.
Just a little?
Just a tiny bit.
Okay. And where could pride go if it's not caught early? What might be the next step? If you're taking God's glory and honor, what's the next step?
Idolatry?
It could be self idolatry, yeah. One step that can flow right out of pride is not thinking that you need to ask for forgiveness for anything.
Mm.
That you don't have a sinful condition, that you don't have the ability to do things that are displeasing to God. Can you see that coming out of pride?
Yeah.
Yes, very easily. So it becomes an attitude then towards God, not just about self and toward others. It also becomes an attitude towards God. And it is often in the presence of others. Can you boast if you're not around somebody else?
What do you mean? Can I boast?
Is there such a thing as boasting if there's nobody listening to you?
Oh, no.
No.
No, you got to be doing prideful acts, somebody else has to be listening, right?
Yes.
To be showing arrogance, somebody else has to be listening, watching. So pride is an attitude of the heart. And it can appear in many forms. Think about in the Bible when Jesus talked about the parable of the Pharisee and the publican. Who was being prideful in that story? People know that story?
Sorry, I don't know the.
We know somebody else is listening. Siri is listening.
Yeah, she just tried to answer your questions.
So the Pharisees were being proud of themselves and feeling righteous and despising those that they thought were sinners in the parable of the Pharisee and the publican. So the Pharisee, would stand on the street corners and pray and think they were great stuff, while the publican was bowing low and being very humble about knowing that they were sinners and that they needed God and that kind of stuff. So that's an example of pride playing out in the Bible. So another aspect of pride is that it's easy to recognize in others, but extremely hard to see in self. Have you noticed that?
I don't know what you're talking about, Melody.
And some pretty good examples of that are teenage girls, right?
Ugh,
Yeah.
girls are terrible.
What kind of stuff comes out of a teenage girl?
Nonsense. Don't get me started.
It's all about the hair being perfect and having the right clothes and the right friends and on and on and on, right?
Look at my shoes. I can't believe you bought your shoes at Walmart. Hell.
Yeah. God forbid.
Uh-huh. So is that a prime example of pride in action?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. So you got a good picture now, right? All right. So another aspect about pride that we also ran into in some of the other deadly sins is that it likes to pit itself against others. It may be an inward focused emotion about self, but self is comparing to others and thinking that they are bigger, that they have to win, they are the winner, things can only be one way, their way. Pride's never caught gazing upward at somebody else, but usually looking down on others,
Mhm.
imagining that they're higher. Pride has to have the first word, which defines the reality of the situation, and the last word, which takes the credit for that reality. You know people that need the first and last word?
I'm married to one of them.
I'm related, so on.
All right, so yeah, so be careful if you need the first word to define the situation and what reality is, and you need the last word to take credit for that reality. Pride might be knocking at your door.
I don't think he does it for the reality, but him and I definitely get into some heated discussions that we have fun with.
Mhm. Pride also renders us unteachable, unreachable, and unchangeable. Why is that?
Because you know everything.
Know it all, okay. Somebody else can't teach you anything.
Because you're better than they are anyway. So what could they
Yeah.
possibly teach you?
Yeah, I'm not refusing to see the error of their ways.
Mhm. So is pride a deadly sin?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. All right. So let's start looking at some scriptures. And I'll just do some over the top stuff for now. I won't expect you to actually go to all of these places, but in the book of Proverbs, pride is used in two senses. In the good sense, in the sense that is admirable and necessary, associated with self-respect, personal dignity, but with the reminder that we always need to avoid self-contempt as part of that. And Acts 2:47 shows us that it's all right to have respect for other people, that that's a kind of pride that is acceptable. So like a parent's pride for their children, that's the good side of pride. And then it also talks about the bad side associated with all the things we've already talked about, arrogance and self-esteem and self-importance and all of that stuff. So Proverbs goes through both of those. So let's look at Matthew 5:3 and see how that might compare to humility and pride.
Matthew 5:3. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven.
All right. Poor in spirit. What's that?
Well, if I switch over to the message version, you are blessed when you are at the end of your rope. With less of you, there is more of God and his rule.
There you go. That's pride, isn't it? Less of you and more of God.
Yep.
Admitting that we're not that big a deal. In fact, we kind of have to become like beggars to enter the kingdom of God, realizing our sin and accepting that there's nothing we can do about it, but that God has the answer. And so pleading with him to forgive us and to let us into his kingdom. All right. So let's go through the words for pride in the Bible. We like to do that, right?
Mhm.
All right. So let's start with the Hebrew words. Ga'avah. Well, that's a real hard one. Gaavah. Ga'avah.
Ga'ava.
Ga'avah.
That's fun to say, though.
It is a fun one to say if you can get it right.
Ga'ava!
So it literally means arrogance or majesty, with the implication of haughtiness or prideful swelling is also a piece of it. So this bigger than life thing. Gobah, Gobahh, is another Hebrew word. It has the underlying meaning of elation or grandeur, but in the sense of arrogance. So height and high and lofty, those kind of words go with Gobah. So pride is setting oneself up on high, so to speak. Another Hebrew word is gadal, Gadal. It has a primitive root that means to twist or to be made larger than life. So do you see pride in that? Twisting the realness of the situation, making something larger than life.
Yes.
All right. Another Hebrew, there's several Hebrew words. This one's got a lot of Hebrew words. Zadon, Zadon, presumptuous. That one goes right along with pride. What's so funny?
I just Ga'ava.
Zadon. Yeah,
I'm sorry. I must have taken a silly pill or
that's okay.
It's all right.
Other languages can sound a little strange to us. Another Hebrew word is rohab, Rohab. It means pride, but in the essence of strength. Another one is rokes, Rokes. It means a snare, like you're tied up in a mesh snare. And it's just a picture word for pride. Shakats, Shachats, from the root for strut, like a lion strutting around, or a chicken or a rooster strutting around to strut. Another word picture for pride. Al Adzonea, Alazzoneia. This has the closely related word of braggadocio, and you can hear pride in that word, but it's the idea of boasting and too much self-confidence. And that is actually a Greek word. Sorry, we're into the Greek words. Here's the next Greek word, tuphoo, Tuphoo. And this one's an interesting word. It means to be enveloped with smoke, to figuratively inflate our self-confidence, to hide the truth, to be enveloped with smoke. And the last Greek word is a long one, huperaphonia, Huperphania, means haughtiness. Those are our big words for today. All right, so now let's dig into the Bible where some of these words are used. So you ready to jump around a little bit? First one is 2 Kings 19:22. And the second one is 2 Chronicles 26:16-20. So whoever has those.
I have 2 Kings.
Okay, 2 Kings 19:22.
Okay, 22. Who is it you had ridiculed and blasphemed? Against whom have you raised your voice and lifted your eyes in pride against the Holy One of Israel.
Okay, there it is in plain Bible speak. Who have you insulted? Who have you blasphemed? Who have you raised your voice against? Who have you lifted your eyes in pride? You think that you're not hurting anybody? Well, you're doing it against God. That's what it says. When you lift your eyes in pride, you're doing it against God. How about 2 Chronicles 26:16-20? This is a little bit of a story here.
Okay, that's Second Chronicles.
2 Chronicles chapter 26, verses 16-20.
26, 16. I'm going to switch back to the NIV. 16-20.
Mm-hmm.
Nope, it's still on the message.
Doesn't matter which one you read it in.
I just switched it back.
Okay.
But after Uzziah became powerful, his pride led to his downfall. He was unfaithful to the Lord his God and entered the temple of the Lord to burn incense on the altar of incense. Azariah the priest, with 8 other courageous priests of the Lord, followed him in. They confronted King Uzziah and said, "It is not right for you, Uzziah, to burn incense to the Lord. That is for the priests, the descendants of Aaron, who have been consecrated to burn incense. Leave the sanctuary, for you have been unfaithful, and you will not be honored by the Lord God." It's through 20, right?
Mm-hmm.
Uzziah, who had a censer in his hand ready to burn incense, became angry. While he was raging at the priests in their presence before the incense altar, the Lord's temple, leprosy broke out on his forehead. When Azariah, the chief priest, and all the other priests looked at him, they saw that he had leprosy on his forehead, so they hurried him out. Indeed, he himself was eager to leave because the Lord had afflicted him.
Why did he get afflicted?
He wasn't supposed to burn the incense. That wasn't for him.
He was doing something he wasn't supposed to do, but he layered on top of that of getting angry about somebody telling him that he couldn't do it.
Mm-hmm.
So it was twofold. Yeah. His pride led to his downfall. It says at the beginning of that. In Job, we hear some other things about pride. Job 33:14-30. Either somebody can read it or I can read it, whichever.
Job
33:14-30.
14-30. For God does speak, now one way, now another, though no one perceives it. In a dream, in a vision of the night, when deep sleep falls on people as they slumber in their beds, he may speak in their ears and terrify them with warnings, to turn them from wrongdoing and keep them from pride, to preserve them from the pit, their lives from perishing by the sword. Or someone may be chastened on a bed of pain, with constant distress in their bones, so that their body finds food repulsive, and their soul loathes the choicest meats. Their flesh wastes away to nothing, and their bones once hidden now stick out. They draw near to the pit, and their life to the messengers of the death. Yet if there is an angel at their side, a messenger, 1 out of 1,000, sent to tell them how to be upright, and he is gracious to that person and says to God, "Spare them from going down to the pit. I have found a ransom for them. Let their flesh be renewed like a child's. Let them be restored as in the days of their youth." Then that person can pray to God and find favor with him. They will see God's face and shout for joy. He will restore them to full well-being. And they will go to others and say, "I have sinned. I have perverted what is right, but I did not get what I deserved. God has delivered me from going down to the pit, and I shall live to enjoy the light of my life. God does all these things to a person twice, even 3 times, to turn them back from the pit, that the light of life may shine on them.
Okay. Interesting, huh? So what is it saying there? That God takes notice of what's going on in our lives and brings things our way to get our attention and turn us back to himself. He gives us, it says twice and even 3 times, and as the children of Israel walked through the desert, 10 times, to bring us back to himself. All right. So Psalm 10, 2-7 says, in his arrogance, the wicked man hunts down the weak who are caught in the schemes he devises. He boasts of the cravings of his heart. He blesses the greedy and reviles the Lord. In his pride, the wicked does not seek him, does not seek God. In all his thoughts, there's no room for God. His ways are always prosperous. He is haughty, and your laws are far from him. He sneers at all his enemies, and he says to himself, nothing will shake me. I'll always be happy and never have trouble. His mouth is full of curses and lies and threats, and trouble and evil are under his tongue. That's a picture of somebody given over completely to pride. And if you want the verse for the verses we talked about at the beginning, Proverbs 11:2 is the one that says, when pride comes, then comes disgrace, but with humility comes wisdom. Proverbs 13:10 says, pride only breeds quarrels, but wisdom is found in those who take advice. Proverbs 16:18 says, pride goes before destruction and a haughty spirit before a fall. And Proverbs 29:23 says, a man's pride brings him low, but a man of lowly spirit gains honor. Are there scriptures in the New Testament about pride? Anybody know where they might be?
In the Gospels.
Okay. How about let's go into some later writings? How about Galatians 6:3-5? And James, we like James, right? 4-6. Galatians 6, 3-5, and James 4, verse 6.
You said Galatians 6.
Yes, Galatians 6, verses 3-5.
Okay, I got it. If anyone thinks they are something when they are not, they deceive themselves. Each one should test their own actions, then they can take pride in themselves alone without comparing themselves to someone else. For each one should carry their own load.
Okay.
And the next one too?
Nope, that's good.
Okay.
So being careful not to think of ourselves more highly than we should, testing our actions. But it says take pride in yourself, but not comparing to someone else, because we each carry our own load.
Mm.
And the James 4:6 one is sort of a sneaky one. It's a quote of the Old Testament. It says, but he gives us more grace. That is why scripture says God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Sneaky. All right, so let's look at the biggest illustration of pride and what can happen to a person that we're given in the Bible. I told you at the beginning we were going to go through Daniel chapter 4. So let's turn there and look at our story. This is about good old Nebuchadnezzar.
What chapter and verse is it?
Chapter 4 of Daniel, and we'll be starting at verse 4.
I don't know how to pronounce that word, Melody.
Nebuchadnezzar.
Okay, but the ease in my house is prospering in my palace.
All right, Nebuchadnezzar. He was king of the world, so to speak, at that point. And it says he was at ease in his home and prosperous in his palace. Life was good for Nebuchadnezzar. He was the most popular and most powerful ruler of his day. He was like king of the world. No one was threatening him. Life was organized around his desires. Snap of his finger, somebody comes running and does whatever he needs them to do. He has his yes men to stroke his ego, to massage his macho. And they told him exactly what he wanted to hear. Because you don't cross the king of the world. But late one night, he's asleep in the palace. And another voice comes creeping and crawling through the locked palace to his very bedchambers and speaks to him in a dream that turns out in his mind to be a nightmare. And there's nothing that can stop God from bringing him this nightmare. So let's see what his nightmare was about. Well, let's see how frightened he was about it first. Verses 5 through 7, and then we'll get the nightmare later, I guess. We'll look at what he did about it first.
Okay. I had a dream that made me afraid. As I was lying in bed, the images and visions that passed through my mind terrified me. So I commanded all the wise men of Babylon be brought before me to interpret the dream for me. When the magicians, enchanters, astrologers, and diviners came, I told them the dream, but they could not interpret it for me.
Okay. He brought in everybody, but nobody had a clue. Then comes our hero of the book. Remember, this book is called Daniel. He's our hero. In the next verse, it says, "At last Daniel came in before me." He was grouped with these people that came before the king. He was second or third in command. He was considered to be somebody that the king would listen to. In fact, his name means God is my judge. And he was praying 3 times a day, and he was uncompromising in his trust in God. So in verse 8, "At last Daniel came in before me, he who was called Belteshazzar." Remember, Nebuchadnezzar had renamed him Belteshazzar after the name of his own god. And the thinking of the day was that if you name somebody, you own them. So that was part of the reason for renaming. So named Belteshazzar after the name of my God, and who is endowed with the spirit of the holy gods, little g-s, and I told him the dream. So at this point, Nebuchadnezzar believes that the gods speak with Daniel and give him interpretations. So now somebody read 9 to 12. This is the beginning of our nightmare that Nebuchadnezzar had.
I said, Belteshazzar, chief of the magicians, I know that the spirit of the holy God is in you, and no mystery is too difficult for you. Here is my dream, interpret it for me. These are the visions I saw while lying in bed. I looked, and there before me stood a tree in the middle of the land. Its height was enormous. The tree grew large and strong, and its top touched the sky. It was visible to the end of the earth. Its leaves were beautiful, its fruits abundant, and on it was food for all. Under it, the wild animals found shelter, and the birds lived in its branches. From its every creature was fed.
Okay.
Is
Picture.
that's
Stop
it?
there. Stop
Okay.
there for a moment. You got the picture. Big,
Mhm.
amazing tree. Humans and animals all come to it for sustenance. It's taller than everything. It's touching the heavens, it says. And can be seen from the ends of the earth. Who do you think this is a picture of?
God? No.
No.
Is he thinking of himself?
Yes, it's a picture of Nebuchadnezzar and what he thinks of himself.
Mm.
All right. Really big, huge, beautiful tree. Okay. Everybody's coming to it for something good. Everything's great. And then the vision goes on. Let's read 13 to 18. Somebody have that?
Yep. In visions I saw while lying in bed, I looked, and there before me was a holy one, a messenger, coming down from heaven. He called in a loud voice, "Cut down the tree and trim off its branches, strip it of its leaves and scatter its fruit. Let the animals flee from under it and the birds from its branches. But let the stump and its roots, bound with iron and bronze, remain in the ground, in the grass of the field." How long am I reading? I'm sorry.
Through 18.
18. Let him be drenched with the dew of heaven, and let him live with the animals among the plants of the earth. Let his mind be changed from that of a man, and let him be given the mind of an animal, till 7 times pass by for him. This decision is announced by messengers. The holy ones declare the verdict, so that the living may know that the Most High is sovereign over all kingdoms on earth and gives them to anyone he wishes and sets over them the lowliest people.
Okay, and this is the dream that I, Nebuchadnezzar, saw. Now you, Belteshazzar, declare the interpretation, since all the wise men of my kingdom are unable to tell me the interpretation. You are able, however, for you are endowed with the spirit of the holy gods. All right, so big tree, messenger from God comes with a holy chainsaw, divine chainsaw, cuts that tree down, gets rid of its branches, scatters its fruit and its foliage. Animals and birds go running. And it says, leaving a stump in the ground, no, not completely destroyed, and the roots, but bind it with an iron and bronze band and let it just sit in the grass and start decaying. And right there at that point, it suddenly changed from talking about a tree to talking about a hymn.
Mhm.
Did you see that change?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. And Nebuchadnezzar, once Daniel interprets it, gets it. He is the hymn, and he is going to end up living like an animal of the field. His nails will grow long, his hair will grow long, he will eat grass. His mind will be changed to that like an animal, and he will live 7 years in that state under this sentence because of his pride. And this is a sentence from the Most High God to prove to him that God is sovereign over all the kingdoms of mortals, and that God can give it to somebody or take it away from them at will. So you got the picture? And here's poor Daniel. He knows the interpretation. And do you think he wants to tell him? Not the best thing to tell your king, I don't think. All right, I'm gonna see if I can get Kathy to take the dogs out because they're complaining. I don't know if you can hear it, but soon it will be more than just a whine here. She's up in her room, so we'll see if she responds. All right, so Daniel, he's faced with having to tell his king. He probably swallows hard and starts in. And he tells him, and I'll read through this section. This is verses 20 to 27. The tree that you saw, which grew great and strong, so that its top reached the heaven and was visible to the ends of the whole earth, whose foliage was beautiful and its fruit abundant, and which provided food for all, under which the animals of the field lived, and whose branches the birds of the air had nests. It is you, O king. You have grown great and strong. Your greatness has increased and reaches to heaven, and your sovereignty to the ends of the earth. And whereas the king saw a holy watcher coming down from heaven and saying, cut down the tree and destroy it, but leave its stump and roots in the ground with a band of iron and bronze in the grass of the field, and let him be bathed in the dew of heaven, and let his lot be with the animals of the field until 7 times pass over him. This is the interpretation, O king. It is a decree of the Most High that has come upon my lord the king. You shall be driven away from human society, and your dwelling shall be with the wild animals. You shall be made to eat grass like oxen. You shall be bathed with the dew of heaven, and 7 times shall pass over you, until you have learned that the Most High is sovereign, has sovereignty over the kingdoms of mortals, and gives it to whom he will. As it was commanded to leave the stump and roots of the tree, your kingdom shall be reestablished for you from the time that you learn that heaven is sovereign. Therefore, O king, may my counsel be acceptable to you. Atone for your sins with righteousness and your iniquities with mercy for the oppressed, so that your prosperity may be prolonged. So he's got this nightmare warning dream. But does he take heed to it? No, he doesn't. I see Lisa shaking her head, and you are right. He does not pay attention. And here's what happens at the end of 1 year from this. Just 1 year later. At the end of 12 months, Nebuchadnezzar was standing on the roof of the palace of Babylon, on a high spot. And the king said, is this not magnificent Babylon, which I have built as a royal capital by my mighty power and for my glorious majesty? What does he do?
Look at me. Look what
Look at
I
me,
did.
look at me. I did this. I, me, my. His pride pits itself against everybody else as if to say, I have won. I did it my way. It's my stuff. I did all this. He totally forgets that there's a God, anything higher than himself. And God brings about exactly what he said he would. If you read on in chapter 4, while the words were still in the king's mouth, a voice came from heaven, O Nebuchadnezzar, to you it was declared, and then what it was declared, and immediately the sentence was fulfilled. And for 7 years, he was driven away from society and lived like an animal. His hair grew long as eagle's feathers, it says, and his nails became like birds' claws.
Gross.
Yeah, and he ate grass. And he was out of his mind.
Even grosser.
And then at the end of 7 years, if you go into verses 34 to 37, it says, when that period was over, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted my eyes toward heaven. Remember, if you're prideful, you're looking inward and you don't look up. Everything's looking down at others. He lifted his eyes toward heaven, and my reason returned to me. My brain came back. I blessed the Most High and praised and honored the one who lives forever. For his sovereignty is an everlasting sovereignty, and his kingdom endures from generation to generation. All inhabitants of the earth are counted as nothing, and he does what he wills with the host of heaven and the inhabitants of earth. There is no one who can stay his hand or say to him, what are you doing? Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and extol and honor the King of heaven, for all his works are truth, and his ways are justice, and he is able to bring low those who walk in pride. He got it.
Mhm.
Why is God so hard on pride?
Mm. I really, it's like a worshiping of yourself rather than God.
Okay.
You start to put yourself almost in the place of God, I think.
And I guess we feel like we don't need him because we are able to do it on our own, kind of.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. We make good creatures, but lousy gods.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm. We're meant to be full of something, not ourselves. We're meant to be full of God's presence and acknowledging who he is. But pride leaves no room for that acknowledgement. Crowds God out. We elevate ourselves. We destroy people, places, and things because it's all about me. So God has taken a different approach, though, to dealing with pride than these stories in the Old Testament that we've been reading. What is his long-range approach to dealing with pride? How does God counter pride?
He finds ways to make you realize that you really are not in control.
Okay. But how did he come to earth?
As a baby.
As a baby, a helpless baby under the most austere conditions, the poorest, lowliest conditions. God has taken the approach with human pride of coming in the opposite form, in the humility of Christ. Born from a humble peasant woman, takes up carpentry as his trade, stays in poor places, doesn't even have a roof over his head most of his time, washes people's feet, which was considered the lowest thing that the lowest of low slaves would do in his time. He sides with the weak, the rejected, the powerless. And he ultimately lays down his life in humble service for the very people that want to do away with him. He doesn't bring his divinity down and declare that you must worship me, and that equality with God, which he does have and is part of him, he doesn't force it upon us when he came as a human being. He came to lay down his life for us, being full of humility, the humble Jesus. That's how God ultimately counters our pride. He shows us his own humility. And there's a hymn, an older hymn that has some pretty good words that go along these lines. It's called "When I Survey the Wondrous Cross." When I survey the wondrous cross on which the Prince of Glory died, my richest gain I count but loss, and pour contempt on all my pride. Forbid it, Lord, that I should boast, save in the death of Christ my God. All the vain things that charm me most, I sacrifice them to his blood. See from his head, his hands, his feet, sorrow and love flow mingled down. Did e'er such love and sorrow meet, or thorns compose so rich a crown? Were the whole realm of nature mine, that were a present far too small, love so amazing, so divine, demands my soul, my life, my all. I'm glad God chooses to deal with us in that way. I'd hate to think that we would become creatures of the field that have lost their minds or become leprous, or what it talked about in Job being so full of pain and physical suffering that we become skin and bones, or all the other things that God could do to deal with our pride, yet he chooses to come to us humbly as the suffering servant, emptying himself. So let's hope that we don't need to be Humpty Dumptys and fall off a wall and fall to pieces in order to be humble and lacking in pride. That God doesn't have to treat us that way, but that we can respond to his humble sacrifice instead. And I will leave it there, except to say that the next of the deadly sins is lust. So that is next week's lesson, and I will stop our recording.